Alright, team, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII. We're discussing Ever Crisis. We're discussing Rebirth in this video. A popular topic of discussion since Ever Crisis was revealed back in, what was that, 2021? I think it was. Is the game spoiling the remake trilogy, right? Or remake part 2 back then as we knew it. Now, this topic has kind of resurfaced recently, which is why I want to revisit it with the information we talked about in the last Ever Crisis video. And it's about Ever Crisis launching with the full FF7 story. Now, in terms of Ever Crisis spoiling the remake trilogy, or remake part 2, or FF7 Rebirth, whatever the hell you want to say, is for a few different reasons. One of the main ones is obviously story elements, because it's going to have the full FF7 story. If you're a newer player when it comes to remake, but you want to hop into Ever Crisis, but you never played the original FF7, it could potentially spoil events that are going to happen in Rebirth and potentially the third game. Now, we don't know yet how faithful like Rebirth and the third game are going to be to the original FF7, right? The devs have said in interviews that it's going to be relatively faithful. They're not going to divert from like the plan or whatever, divert from the original story too much. But then they also marketed this shit as like Unknown Journey, right? Like the end of Remake says the Unknown Journey will continue. The trailer we got recently, if I'm not mistaken, says like the Unknown Journey continues. So it's like, which one is it? Are we being faithful to OG FF7, or is it an Unknown Journey going forward? That's what's kind of confusing there. Yeah, obviously in like a nice little package, Ever Crisis is going to give us the full FF7 story. And actually, that's something people clarified in the last video for me, is that we're not going to have like extra shit. It's just going to be like it's going to be story stuff. Kind of, that's all they're going to do apparently when it comes to Ever Crisis, which is good and bad. I would like the freedom to be able to do like extra shit that exists in the original FF7, but if they're just trying to recap the FF7 story and the other compilation stuff stories, like that makes sense, I guess. That's fine. On the topic of Ever Crisis kind of spoiling story elements, well, FF7 Original exists on like every platform, so it's like not a big deal. Like if people want to play Ever Crisis and spoil the shit for themselves, they can. But also they've had the option to play FF7 Original on a multitude of platforms for years now, dude. It exists on like everything, all the way down from your mobile phone all the way up to your consoles and your PC. Like you can play FF7 Original on everything. So it's like it's up to people's discretion if they want to play Ever Crisis to potentially spoil stuff. So it's not a big, like, whatever. The other bit of Ever Crisis spoiling stuff for Rebirth in the third game is getting to see characters and, like, enemies and bosses, and I guess even, like, weapons we've yet to see when it comes to the remake project. Getting to see those, like, ahead of time, right? And it's more prevalent now because we know that Ever Crisis is going to launch with the full FF7 story. And when it comes to Ever Crisis, it obviously looks pretty close to the original FF7, just graphically better. But when you go into battles, like, they look like the remake counterparts, right? Like, they look like what they look like in Remake, which means we're going to get to potentially see, not even potentially, we're definitely going to get to see Cid. Vincent's a little bit interesting just because Vincent and Yuffie are optional in the original FF7, right? So I don't know if they're going to be a part of Ever Crisis. People talk a lot about this stuff, about getting to see these characters in the game, right? You get to see him ahead of time, but I don't know if we're going to get Vincent. Would we get him? Because there's not a whole lot of story for him. There's not a story reason that we get Vincent when it comes to FF7 Original. I would expect us to get him, but Cid is obviously a main character in the story. Like, you go to Rocket Town, you have to talk to Cid. He has to join the party, right? Like, that's a whole different thing. So, like, with Ever Crisis only giving us the story elements, there's a lot of optional steps you got to do to get Vincent, right? Like, you can just look up the codes for the safe, but regardless, you got to get the safe numbers, unlock the safe, fight lost number, get the key, go down the basement, unlock the door, and then you got to talk to him in a certain way, if I'm not mistaken, to actually get him to join the party. And would they have all that in Ever Crisis when it's not even necessary for the story itself for OG FF7? Kind of the same thing with Yuffie, right? And for one, to acquire Yuffie in the original FF7, you have to, like, be in the overworld. You got to go into, like, the forested areas and run into her and then fight her. After you beat her ass, you got to, like, do very specific steps in that field afterwards to be able to get her to join the party. Like, maybe they could just have you beat her ass and she joins the party, but also there's no overworld, so how would we acquire her? At least I don't think there's an overworld. And really the difference between Yuffie and Vincent is, like, Yuffie at least has shit to do in the game. Like, you can do the whole Wutai side quest, right? And that's all optional in original FF7, but there's still, like, story elements there, right? Like, what does Vincent have in original FF7 besides, like, chiming in on, like, topics when he's a part of the party or whatever, or talking about, like, Shinra, Turk, Sephiroth, whoever, besides, like, the Lucrezia cave? Does he have anything in the original game? Because I can't recall right now. I don't think he does. So what would even be the point of him joining the party? Besides fan service, of course. But actually, even when you really think about it, when it comes to the original FF7, Wutai is entirely optional. One of, like, a few locations in the game that are 100% optional. You never, ever, ever need to go there. That's different to something like Gongaga or Fort Condor, right? When you first come across those locations, you can bypass them. They're optional at those moments, but you are going to be forced to go to them eventually, right? You'll wake up in Gongaga at one point after, like, the Temple of the Ancients shit, and then you eventually go to Fort Condor for, like, the huge materia stuff, right? But, like, you never need to go to Wutai. So really, when you think about it, there's not really a reason that Yuffie should be in this game. There is story to be had in Wutai, of course. You can go there and get like some Turk stuff and Don Corneo and obviously the Yuffie side quest shit. But ultimately, there's not a reason for the FF7 story as a whole to go there, if that makes any sense. But to kind of hop to the other side of this conversation, obviously Yuffie and Vincent are canon to the Final Fantasy VII story as a whole, even if they were optional in the original FF7. And she's Yuffie's a character in Crisis Core, and you get a little tease of Vincent in Crisis Core as well. And we've seen Yuffie in the Crisis Core stuff for Ever Crisis, so maybe they do make you get those characters with the Ever Crisis story for FF7. Like maybe when you go to like Nibelheim, it's a part of the story to go into the Shinra Manor and do all the shit to get Vincent, like acquire Vincent, like through the narrative or whatever the fuck. But still, I don't know. Anyways, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important discussion, something that I thought of while making this video that we had to talk about. But ultimately, the point is, we're going to get to see shit ahead of time. That's the main thing here. We're going to get to see bosses that are going to be in Rebirth, bosses that will be in the third game, characters that will be in like the second and third game, like long before we actually get these games in our hands. So it's kind of interesting that they're going to go that route. That's why some people think that like Ever Crisis has been intentionally delayed, because like if Ever Crisis came out a long time ago like it's supposed to, and even if it's dropping content monthly, we would have already had the entire Final Fantasy VII story by now, right? So the fact that it's going to launch and have the whole story, we should get to see Vincent, Cid, and like, tons of bosses. I mean, we're going to get a fight like Sephiroth at the end of the game, right? At the end of Ever Crisis, we're going to fight Bizarro Sephiroth and Safer Sephiroth and shit like that. It's going to be interesting to see this shit in like pretty close to remake graphics in terms of the combat. Like, why would they want to do that? It's kind of strange. And it makes a lot of people think that we're going to get, at least for Rebirth, a trailer that's going to show off the characters before Ever Crisis drops. Like, I believe we're told that Ever Crisis is going to drop sometime this year. Again, who the fuck knows? Like, we'll believe that when we see it. But if Ever Crisis is going to drop sometime like later in this year, we need to get a trailer that shows off like Cid and potentially Vincent and stuff like that before Ever Crisis spools those elements. But it's stuff like this that makes me believe that there's going to be newer elements to the story, not just them adding additional content here and there for like Rebirth and the third game, like actual narrative differences between Rebirth, third game, and the original FF7, because we have stuff like Ever Crisis dropping, and also, them like re-releasing Crisis Core Union. That's always stood out to be weird to me. They've had like 15 years to, remaster and re-release Crisis Core, and they just never did. And randomly they drop it now, like between Remake and Rebirth, they drop Crisis Core Union and spoil what is supposed to be like one of the biggest twists in the FF7 story. And it's why I think things are going to be different. It's why I think there's going to be new elements. Whatever that's going to be, I don't know exactly right now. Yeah, all this is like a good reason why I'm excited for Ever Crisis, getting to see shit ahead of time. Like, obviously, there's a lot of time between these games. It'd be nice to kind of know what to expect or what to see when it comes to like the second and third game, when it comes to the remake project. Like, for example, I'm a big fan of Dyne. We're going to get the Dyne and Barrett fight. We're going to get the Corel prison story in Ever Crisis, and when we go into the fight to fight Dyne with Barrett, we'll get to actually see his character model and kind of what he would look like, or what he's going to look like for Rebirth and shit. Like, that's exciting. That's why I'm really looking forward to Ever Crisis, man. Among other things, of course. And actually, before we wrap up the video, hopping back to that trailer discussion I mentioned previously for Rebirth, obviously when it comes to Rebirth, we don't know for sure that we're getting the full party, right? I think it's an okay chance that they would hold off one character for the third game, or like, post-Rebirth we do a DLC for like Vincent or something like that. Vincent's the main one we're talking about here, because he's optional in the original FF7, right? So they can do whatever they want with him, because it's not really a part of the story for FF7 original. So when it comes to Remake, Rebirth, third game, like, all cards are off the table when it comes to like Yuffie and Vincent, right? There's so much going to be new with just those characters alone. So who knows what they're going to do? But if Vincent is going to be a part of Rebirth, you definitely want to show him off in a trailer for Rebirth before Ever Crisis spoils that. So I definitely think we'll get a trailer that shows off the full party, everybody, Cait Sith, Vincent, Cid, before Ever Crisis spoils that for us. I just realized until recording that I didn't mention Cait Sith. I always forget to mention Cait Sith, but we've seen the cat already. We just haven't seen the cat on top of the Moogle, but we'll probably see that in a trailer again before Ever Crisis spoils that. But of course, pass off to you guys. So what are your thoughts on Ever Crisis spoiling stuff when it comes to like Rebirth and the third game? But also, is that a good thing, bad thing? What are you looking forward to seeing? What do you not want spoiled? But also when it comes to that topic of like Vincent and Yuffie being optional characters in OGFF7, would they even be a part of Ever Crisis? I could see the fan service of just putting them in there somehow. Or maybe you just do like a random-ass quest or side thing in the game, and you can unlock them to use them in the story mode and stuff like that. Because you can build whatever random parties you want to in Ever Crisis to go through areas or whatever, for dungeons or whatever the fuck. So they could still just be like optional characters that you can use for like dungeons and shit. But I just don't know if they're going to be in like the story stuff. At least with OGFF7. Obviously they're going to be in Dirge Cerberus and shit. Anyways, that is the video, my dudes. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @SaveAYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Like Coltrane, we in here. Like Logain or leave it. Like Cobain.